Hi guys, today we're going to be looking at To the Moon by Percy, Bysshe, Shelley. Maybe the first thing you want to know is how to pronounce that name. It's a killer spelling. At Poetry Matters, the first question we like to consider is the big one. Why read it? I think one quote from Shelley suggests itself here, which is from his preface to Prometheus Unbound. He says, "Didactic poetry is my abhorrence." Just to break that down for you, didactic meaning trying to teach a moral lesson, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, and abhorrence meaning he hates that. He doesn't want to write poetry that tries to tell us what to do. Instead, he just wants the reader to love and admire and trust and hope and endure. And I highlight those two in particular because I think they give a lot of insight into what the poem is about, which is hoping and enduring, and maybe a bit of love, but we'll see. It's also a poem that's fundamentally about empathy. The whole poem is one question to the moon, which is, do you ever feel like this? That's it. Anyway, let me read it first, and then we'll break down 3 things you might want to look out for. To the moon. Art thou pale for weariness of climbing heaven, and gazing on the earth, wandering companionless among the stars that have a different birth? And ever changing, like a joyless eye that finds no object worth its constancy. The first thing we could look at is the symbolism of the moon. Obviously, it means that it's night, it's dark, maybe Percy's feeling a little gloomy. I think it's worth noting that at the same time as Percy is writing poetry, you have Francisco de Goya painting paintings in Madrid, one of which from 1798 is "The sleep of reason produces monsters." So sleep, night, and monsters, the monsters of madness opposed to reason. That might be something worth looking out for. I've bunched the 2 main things that the moon can symbolize into kind of 2 groups, one of which is time and change. We get the ever-changing moon, and that's reflected in the tides, the idea of flux. I think this is going to be really key for the poem. The one that's not as key or relevant in this poem, but is in other poems, is its relevance to Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt and of the moon. Her symbol is the moon. And menstruation, another monthly cycle. I don't think that Shelley's really talking about this as much in this poem, but all in all, this idea of constancy, I think, will link with endurance over time, constancy throughout the change, and this idea of waxing and waning. It goes from a crescent moon to a full moon. But it always comes up and it always goes down, and there's the constancy, and the moon can't seem to find a purpose or something to serve that's worth that constancy. The second big idea is found just in this word, pale. In this word alone, we get so many ideas, one of which is death. You get pallor mortis, it's the first stage of death. You might have heard of rigor mortis. Pallor mortis is Latin for paleness of death, literally. There's also the idea of winter, so snow, snowy, white. This would link with the symbolism of the moon because you can actually see the moon more clearly on a winter night. So it all kind of adds up. And finally, the idea of madness crops up again in this word. From "The sleep of reason produces monsters," we had that there. In Hamlet, for example, madness is associated with pallor a lot. His pale cast of thought in his famous monologue from Act 3, Scene 1, or when he raves mad to Ophelia in Act 2, Scene 1, his face is described as pale as his shirt. So in Hamlet, we get that's partly where we get this idea from Elizabethan drama. And why the eye is the last thing I want to look at. Shelley's not the first person to suggest the comparison of the moon to the eye. Aeschylus, the famous Greek tragedian, he described Semele, the Greek goddess of the moon, as the eye of the night. We also have an ancient ancient Egyptian mythology, the eye of Horus. Horus is the Egyptian sky god. His left eye was associated with the sun. His right eye was associated with the moon. You also get a little teardrop here, which links with the joylessness of the eye. Obviously, there's the visual sense in Shelley's choice of eye. So that might be metaphorically searching for an object, for a companion, for something worth the moon's constancy. What is that object? Is it romantic? Is it a lover? Is it religious? The idea of religious hope, which goes back to the short essay he published at Oxford for which he got expelled, The Necessity of Atheism. So in an atheistic world, the moon has no object worth its constancy, an object being God. Is it intellectual, the kind of the constancy of an intellectual pursuit, or is it spiritual generally, a kind of spiritual emptiness?